Three more women have now come forward about my boss. As a man, you've really made me think. I've now been able to finally tell my mum. I hope by the time you've heard my story that you're going to be able to find your voice and speak out. So today, I'm going to be telling you about what happened to me, how I healed from those events, and the power of sharing our story. So at 13, I knew that my childhood was over, and it all began with a night out. And I want to take you back to the late 1970s. We were listening to disco, it was Michael Jackson and Donna Summer, and a friend and I had a plan for a night out. We were a bit scheming because her mum was away, and there was an empty flat, so she told her grandma she was staying at my mum's, and I told my mum's I was staying at her grandma. Somehow, we managed to convince an off-licence that we were over 18. I really don't know how, but it was the late 1970s. We bought a bottle of vodka. I was about half the size I am now. I had never drunk before. We took it to a cafe, and under the table we drank our vodka. I got very drunk, very, very quickly, and threw up actually all over the place, so we were kicked out. And two young men put us in a black taxi and took us home to her mum's empty flat. In the taxi on the way there, the assault had started, and I've often wondered about the taxi driver. Didn't he have a mother? Didn't he have a sister, a daughter? But he chose to ignore what was clearly taking place in the back of his taxi. It became very clear very early on that they weren't there to let me sleep off the sick. And very early on I realised that they were there for something else. My friend was placed in another room and I was in this room. It's very odd what takes place when you're being raped by two men. I was very aware of all the sounds outside of this flat while I'm lying on the floor while these two men are raping me. I was aware in the communal gardens that there was a barbecue, and I find myself thinking, I wonder what they're eating. Are they having chicken or lamb kebabs? Are the children playing games? And then my attention would drift back into the room, and I would do anything to avoid being present to what was taking place to my body. And I became aware of a border that went all the way around the top of the wall, which was made out of pink and grey bows. And I counted these bows over and over and over again. There were 44 bows in total. Everything was very hazy. The memories took me a long time to recover. One of the things I do remember, the very last thing that happened was that they held the knife to my throat, the knife that they had already used on me, and said that if I told anyone that they would come back and kill me. And I kind of believed them. In the morning, I thought that they were coming back. I could hear this noise jangling, and then I realised that they were the bangles that belonged to my friend, who was now in the bed next to me. She was still fully clothed, and I was naked. There was now injuries on my body which I couldn't remember how I got. I knew about the vomit, but now there were signs of blood and excrement and semen. I had been stabbed. There were cigarette burns. Everything was so hazy in that point. The only thing that was clear to me, as clear as a cloudless sky, was that nothing would ever be the same again. We decided not to speak about it, to clean up the flat. I scrubbed my body as good as I can. She went home to her grandma's and I went home to my mum's. And the next day was school. And I just got on with life. Well, I thought I got on with life. But what I've learned is that what we don't speak about, it leaks out of us. And it leaked out of me in many, many, many ways. I became anorexic. I used drugs. I used alcohol. I was so rebellious. Anything to blot out the memories. I became really promiscuous, which I know is a really common side effect from women that are raped. And I just really hated myself so much. I just felt so worthless, so contaminated, so dirty that I just didn't want to be alive anymore. I did not understand the point to me. So I took as many as my mum's pills that I could find, and I woke up in Edgware General Hospital after I had been pumped out, which I didn't remember. And I was transferred to a children's psychiatric ward where I would spend 3 months. When I was writing my book, Unbroken, I was really interested to see if they had any idea why I went from a normal, geeky, shy teenager to overnight to one who couldn't speak and one who couldn't eat. But reading my notes, which was a very interesting read, they had no idea. They just treated me for my depression and treated me for my anorexia. I left the hospital and my behaviour hadn't got much better. My parents discovered I was smoking a lot of drugs and did every teenager's worst nightmare, called all my friends' parents and told them what we were all up to. So at this point in my life, nobody was speaking to me at school. And my parents were questioning my behaviour all the time. Don't you realise what you're doing, the harm that could come to you? In my head, I'm screaming, well, the worst has already happened. But I couldn't find my voice to speak out. When I was about 16, I wrote a note and I left it on my pillow and went to school. And in this note, I put the bare details of what had happened that night. And when I got home, my dad turned to me and said, "Is this true?" And I said, "Yes." So they called the other girl involved, and she said, "No, it didn't happen like she said it had. They were nice boys, they were sons of diplomats, they wouldn't do that." So it had taken me 3 years to find my voice, and then I just felt I wasn't believed, which just led me onto a bigger downward spiral. So my parents thought it would be a good idea to go away, and I went to Israel for a year. I lived on a kibbutz for 6 months, and I lived in a town for 6 months called Ashkelon as well. And it was there that I met Stephen, a blonde, blue-eyed Glaswegian, didn't have quite as much hair anymore, and we got together. And when I left Israel, he was in Glasgow, I was in London, and he still wanted to see me, and I couldn't understand why did he want to see me. I thought that he would see me how I saw myself, as contaminated, dirty, worthless, but he wanted to carry on seeing me, and I would drive him mad. Say, "Well, what is it about me? Why do you love me? What could you possibly see in someone like me?" But he just loved me, and in his loving me over the years, it's been a lot of years now, 35, I realised that I was lovable and I was able to love back. So we got married, but one of the things I always told him when we first met is that I would never become a mum. I thought that giving birth was going to be like being raped again, and there's no way I wanted to put myself through that. But I remember the exact moment when I completely reversed my thinking. It was early 90s, and we were away. I don't know why I live in Glasgow, because I love the sunshine. So we would save all our annual leave and go away for like 3-4 weeks every winter. We were on a beach in Thailand called Koh Phi Phi, and he turned to me again and said, "How about starting a family?" And I was all ready with my usual response of, I can't do that." But something came in, and I thought, if I never become a mum, then these 2 young men would have won. They would have taken away a huge chunk of my life, and I didn't want them to have that power and control over my life anymore. And I thought, if I never become a mum, then they've won. And it was then that I came up with my plan that I call my best revenge. And I was determined to live my life as best as I could, just refusing to be identified by what had happened to me. So, about 2 years later, after a lot of therapy, along comes Anna. And then about 3 years later, Mimi appears. And then 5 years later, Layla completes our family. And I really thought I was healed, and that was that. But bam, out of nowhere, Anna turns 13, and all my memories come flooding back, flashing back in nightmares, body memories, just images, thinking I was seeing them everywhere. I was studying psychotherapy at the time and I was doing a lot of personal development, and now I see the memories were always going to come back. I was a really bad client. I went to my therapist and said, I want you to help me take these memories away. I don't want to remember that anymore. In fact, I thought I was going mad. I thought, well, if these memories were so bad, surely I would remember it. Now I understand it's because they were so bad. That's why I couldn't remember it. So I started to see that in order for me to move on and learn to accept what had happened, I was going to have to face all that was done to me. It took me about 3 years, and actually in the end, it wasn't the details that were really stopping me from moving on, it was my denial. I didn't want to believe that people could treat a young 13, naive girl like that. But the more I denied it, the more the memories would just come flashing back, flooding me all the time. I'd see them everywhere. And I saw actually that my way in was going to be my way out. Once I stopped denying all of those memories, it was a lot easier. And then near to the end of my therapy, my therapist said to me, you know, maybe these 2 young men weren't born rapists. And I was outraged. How dare he say that to me? You know, I fantasized about somebody kidnapping them, taking them to an empty flat, torturing, tying them up, you know, raping them for 4 or 5 hours on end, just like they had done to me. But he planted a seed in my mind, and it started to grow. And the more I thought about what he had said, I really wanted to understand, how could they behave so violently towards another human being? Because I do believe that we're all born equal. We all come in the same way. I have a very good friend who used to be a midwife, and she once said to me that she has delivered thousands of babies, and she never once met an evil baby. And that always stayed with me. So I wanted to understand, what had they seen? What had they heard? What had they experienced themselves to make them behave the way that they did to me that night? And I started to see that they had got conditioned by life. You know, when they were dehumanizing me, they were really dehumanizing themselves. They weren't connected into their being, their light, their source, whatever you want to call it, in order for them to behave so violently towards another human being. And something happened in all of this process that took me completely by surprise. I started to feel empathy towards these 2 young men, and I started to see that if I hold on to all this hate and anger and revenge, the only person that's hurting is me. That they would have no idea that I am feeling so angry and hating and revengeful all the time. It was only going to impact on my husband and my kids and my friends. They would have no idea. And I started to feel forgiveness towards them, which I never imagined I could do that. I call myself an accidental forgiver. And I really started to feel empathy towards these 2 young men. I thought, well, they have to live with what they've done to me. I can change my life and move on and heal from these events, but they will be affected, whether they're aware of that or not. It's going to affect them in some way. So I saw that I had a choice, that I could choose to hang on to all this hurt and all this disappointment, all this trauma, or I could just choose to let it go. And I saw that if I have a choice, then we all have a choice of how we respond and how we react to things in life. And it's not really what happens to us that is important. It's what we do with what happens to us that really, really matters at the end of the day. And so that was the choice that I made, to live my life as well as I could, and I have done a really good job of that. I'm really in a good place. And on the 22nd of September 2014, after 35 years of silence, I decided to share my story publicly with an organisation called the Forgiveness Project, and they collect stories of forgiveness like mine. And people that have been victims and from perpetrators that have changed their lives around. And I completely underestimated what the impact would be. To start with, friends got in contact. They didn't know the details. They didn't know it had been near fatal. And then friends of friends, and then people I didn't know, then people from this country and other countries. And they all started to share their stories of rape and sexual abuse and sexual assault and harassment with me. And I started to really understand why the founder of the Forgiveness Project, Marina, calls us story healers rather than storytellers, the power of sharing our story. And I just want to give you one little bit of evidence, I think, that really shows that and what I felt in the power that comes from sharing our stories. So when I went public with sharing my story, so many doors opened for me, and I was contacted by TV, radio, press, and I've done lots of interviews all over the place. But the best one was Radio 4 asked me, will I be interviewed by Sir Trevor MacDonald? I went, well, let me think about that for a minute. Okay, so Sir Trev, the ledge, interviewed me down in London. It was called Redemption, and he was obviously as amazing as you think he is. He was just gorgeous to meet. His voice was constantly in my house because my dad was obsessed with the news, so it was like meeting an old uncle. It was amazing. But what was more amazing was what took place afterwards. A friend of mine, Sandra, who also works for the Forgiveness Project, told me her mum had been listening to the radio that day. And she turned around that evening and said to her, Sandra, I heard this woman, Madeleine, on the radio, and it was just like she said it was. And she said, Mum, what are you talking about? She said, I felt so ashamed and I felt so guilty and I couldn't talk about what happened to me. She said, Mum, what are you talking about? She said, I was raped as well when I was 17. And that day, Sandra's mum broke 64 years of silence. She had never told anybody. And my friend said to me, if she hadn't heard me that day on the radio, she would have taken it to her grave. And now it has opened up a space between them that was never ever there before, and she calls it gold. She said now it's just changed their relationship completely. So I just want to end my short talk with you all today with a quote by the late, great Dr. Maya Angelou. And she says, whilst I may be changed by what happens to me, I refuse to be reduced by it. Thank you.